Shields up, Ironbreakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be talking about Rise of Ronin. This title was sent to me by PlayStation Portugal so that I could give it a look and tell you guys my opinions on it. Today's video is going to be a preview that is based only on the very beginning portions of the game. I can't really talk about multiplayer just yet. I've been informed to let you guys know that the version of the game that I am playing is being referred to as a pre-launch version, and the team is still working on the day one patch. Now, having said that, the experience that I've had with this title, I would say that the key words that are best used to describe it would be dated and hefty price point. And I know this is a pretty aggressive way to start a video, but that's just kind of how I feel. Usually I start these videos by talking a little bit about the visuals, and I kind of feel like this was already a giveaway if you've watched any of the gameplay footage that they've shared so far. The gameplay that you guys are actually watching in this video is going to be B-roll that was provided to me. I can't really show my gameplay footage just yet, but you know, if you take a look at these visuals, in my opinion, they look very dated. As a matter of fact, I would say that this is a significant downgrade from some of their previous titles like Wolong and Nioh 2. And by the way, I've tested all the different modes, performance, graphics, and ray tracing, which are the three different visual modes that we have in this game, and I didn't even notice that big of a difference between them, which is why I just ended up playing in performance mode throughout most of my experience. Now, I imagine that this is one of the sacrifices that the team had to make in order to create the open world of Rise of Ronin, but, you know, that's just one of those things that I have to point out straight from the get-go. Now, when it comes to visuals, these aren't really a deal breaker for me personally, but I do feel that a lot of people will be quick to make the comparison with something like Ghost of Tsushima, which in my opinion had much better visuals on the PlayStation 4. And when I say that Ghost of Tsushima had much better visuals, I'm saying like it's not even in the same league. It's nowhere close to being on the same level of fidelity, animation-wise, just the overall flow, art style, like nowhere near Ghost of Tsushima, okay? And I already know that some people might point this out and say, oh, that's not really a fair comparison, but to me, it's also important to remember, you guys, that, listen, this is a $70 PlayStation 5 title, and as such, it needs to be held to the same standard as previous PlayStation exclusives. At least this is the way that I personally look at it. Like, I understand that certain people will have certain thoughts on when it comes to this stuff, but it is important to just point this out, okay? That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to provide you guys with information so that you can make up your own minds. I'm not telling you go do this or go do that. I'm just telling you how I personally felt when I jumped into the game. I was like, wow, I'm surprised that these are the visuals that we're dealing with when it comes to this particular title. Now, if we look past the graphical fidelity of Rise of Ronin, there is something that I personally always consider to be much more important, which is animation. And when it comes to this regard, I think that combat animations are absolutely fine, but the traversal animations could be better, especially when it comes to the animation of horse riding, which is really bad, especially after games like, again, Ghost of Tsushima and Red Dead Redemption. And when I'm talking about Red Dead Redemption, I'm talking about Red Dead Redemption 1, which had better horse animation in my opinion, you know? But hey, it is what it is. Once we go beyond visuals, we're going to be jumping into combat, and this is one of the things that when I mentioned recently in my community page that I've been playing Rise of Ronin, the most asked question was, how does the game's combat stack up to Nioh 2? And the reality is, Nioh 2 had much more complexity in its first couple of hours than Rise of Ronin, and the first couple of hours is all I can really talk about. However, I can speculate on how complex it gets later on based on what I've seen in the UI as well as my experience playing some of the different weapons, so let's go ahead and break it down. So you have square as your basic combo, which you usually tend to have in most of these types of games, and the square attacks can be charged to perform some different actions depending on the weapon that you have equipped as well as the combat styles, which I'll refer a little bit further on. Then you have triangle for parries as well as critical hits. The combat system in Rise of Ronin utilizes a key system, which is essentially stamina for both you and the enemies. So very much like in previous games, the idea here is you break the enemy's gauge, you press triangle, and you get a critical hit, and then you rinse and repeat. Now, beyond your basic attacks as well as your parrying, there's also going to be a block that you can just perform by holding down L1, And then there's also martial skills that you can perform by pressing R1 and the corresponding faceplate button. Now, when you begin the game, you're only going to really have 2 martial skills for most of the weapons that are available to you, but as you play more and more, I believe that you will eventually unlock 4 martial skills, so 1 for each of the faceplate buttons. It's important to mention that the enemies themselves also have martial skills, and those are going to be basically the red glowing attacks that an enemy does that you can't really block, and it's going to be a little bit trickier to dodge. So the whole point is going to be that when an enemy does one of those red glowing attacks, you want to make sure that you try and perform a perfect parry. And then the combat styles are most definitely going to come into play. And you guys might be wondering, okay, so what exactly are combat styles? And in a way, they're kind of like Neo stances, but not really, because the idea here is this is a rock, paper, scissors combat system, wherein, depending on the weapon that your enemy is using, you're going to want to be in a specific combat style. So the whole idea is, oh, the enemy has a katana, so maybe I'll use either the chi combat style or the ten combat style, and I forget, or the jin combat style. And depending on the style that you use, once you use a style that has an advantage, what's going to happen is you're going to deal significantly more ki damage whenever you parry the enemy. And this is actually very important because I've been in situations where my style was either neutral or disfavorable, and I could be landing like 4, 5, 6 parries in a row, and nothing would really happen of any significance to the enemy's ki gauge, which, this is very, very important. So in some situations, you might even want to change your weapon if you can, whenever you're fighting an enemy that's particularly tough, in order to really fix the combat style that is advantageous against them, in order to really take advantage of the whole system of parrying them and actually being able to stagger them and then being able to do lots of other actions to them, because otherwise they're just going to get completely comboed to death. Now, an important thing when it comes to combat styles is that they're not unlocked from the get-go. So even though you might have a weapon, you might be stuck with only one combat style for a significant portion of time. Now, the way that you unlock new combat styles is you're actually going to be required to find these fugitives throughout the open world and fight them. Now, different fugitives will be masters of different weapons, so you want to find the fugitives that have the weapon that you want to learn new combat styles for, and also earn additional experience on that weapon to unlock more things like potentially additional martial skills, etc., etc. So the idea is find the fugitives that use the same weapons that you do and kind of learn from them almost by killing them, It's just the way that it goes. And then you were going to unlock further complexity to the combat system. Now, different combat styles will also feature different martial skills, all again depending on the weapon as well. So there's going to be a lot of variety when it comes to the martial skills that are going to be available to you. As for the effectiveness of the martial skills, the whole idea, from what I can tell from the game's combat mechanic and looking at the in-game tutorials and all of this stuff, is all about this mechanic called panic. So the idea here is whenever you parry an enemy a certain amount of times, especially if you have the combat style that opposes them, so you have the advantage over them, eventually they're going to go into this panic state, which highlights their health gauge in red, and it indicates like, uh-oh, the enemy's like, they're in trouble. And this is when you really want to use martial skills, because they're going to deal additional ki damage, they're going to deal additional damage. So the whole thing appears to be more about, select the right combat style as opposed to swap combat styles on the fly, which is what you kind of had in Neo before, where it's like, oh, the enemy is doing this, so I'm going to go into like low stance and I can fight much faster. Or the enemy is doing this, so I'm going to go into heavy stance so that I can punish his attacks harder. That would be kind of like your decision making when it comes to Neo. Whereas in here, there's literally like an arrow pointing up on top of the enemy's health, indicating, hey, now you're doing good, make sure to use this combat style, or an arrow pointing down indicating, uh-oh, you're actually at a disadvantage, so you're the one who's going to be getting panicked, and you have all of these other disadvantages on top of that. So that's why this system is very important. Now, there are certain enemies that can kind of like swap styles on the go, which will require you to also swap your styles, but like I mentioned, in this game, it appears to be much more of a rock, paper, scissors than an actual decision that you're making based on how you like a specific moveset or not. Changing a combat style changes the moveset of your square combo significantly. It also changes the way that your parry kind of works slightly. So there's a lot of stuff to that. And like I've already mentioned, it also changes all of your martial skills. Now, on top of that, there's also a blade flash mechanic, which is basically this game's version of the key pulse if you've played previous Neo games, wherein the whole idea was you do a bunch of attacks onto an enemy, and then eventually you press R1 in order to kind of like recover your ki. The idea here is the same, but there's actually a blood gauge below your weapon that indicates how much blood is on the weapon, because the whole theory on this game is the more you attack enemies, your weapon gets chock full of blood. And then eventually you have to, take away the blood in order to recover your gauge. But it's still done kind of very much in a similar way as key pulsing. So you attack the enemies, and then after a while you press the button, you recover your ki, and you can keep on beating the crap out of them. Now, this game also has a grappling hook, which can be used in combat. You can like throw enemies off balance, but there's even more interesting mechanics. Like, for instance, you can be fighting an enemy and you can throw an explosive barrel at him, which is definitely something that I've leaned on quite often whenever it comes to fighting stronger enemies, bigger enemies, and stuff like that. That seems like they have more ki than me, that deal more damage than me. If I see barrels around, I'm yeeting barrels nonstop with the grappling rope, which is pretty fun, arguably, for sure. I enjoy that. And then, one of this game's more defining characteristics, in my opinion, is going to be the blade twin and swapping characters mechanic. Now, at the very beginning of the game, you are, whenever you create your character, you're not creating just one character, you're creating two characters. So you're creating your protagonist character, and then you're creating its blade twin. Because the whole idea is that you guys come from a village wherein these characters get trained up as special assassins, but they work in twos so that one always has the other one's back. But this is a mechanic that comes into play very early in a mission where you're going to this boat and you're supposed to assassinate this dude. And the two characters are going through, and you can basically swap characters whenever you want, which I think is a very neat mechanic, because the idea is, imagine you're in a boss fight, right? You have limited amounts of ki for all of your attacks, so what you can do is you just unload all of your ki onto the boss, and then you swap characters, and you continue attacking with the other character, unload all of your ki again, and then you swap characters again and keep going, and you can really stay on the aggression by constantly swapping characters, which is pretty cool. Another way to utilize this system is also attack the boss until you gain aggro, and then swap characters, continue punishing the boss, and when the boss aggroes the other character, swap back. So there's a lot of interesting things that you can kind of do by just swapping characters back and forth, because if you have ever played with NPCs in the Team Ninja games, usually, while they are useful for distracting the bosses from time to time, they're not really the best when it comes to performance. But when you can control both characters and swap between them, you can basically stay on the offensive much more often. And I've noticed that this is something that I found myself doing quite often whenever I was struggling in the game. I was like, okay, I'm going to go full on aggression by just swapping characters nonstop. This is one of those things where I feel like the combat kind of shines a little bit better in these situations, but at the same time, it takes quite a bit getting used to, because you're used to the moveset of your character, and you're used to the martial skills that you have in your character, and then you swap to another one. And you guys might be saying, oh, but if you keep swapping between the same two characters, you'd get used to it very quickly, right? But the thing is, you get separated from your blade twin very early on, and then you get to team up with other characters that are significantly different. And then eventually, I'm assuming that you'll get to team up with even more different characters that will require you to learn more and more different movesets and so on and so forth, which can get quite complex in terms of the swapping. Now, the thing about the swapping of characters, though, is that it doesn't really happen out in the open world. It only happens when you do specific missions. So there are specific missions that you go on, very much whenever it comes to open world games, there's always that moment where it's like, okay, so this is an important mission, like a main story mission, or even a significant side quest or something like that. In this game, there's just straight up a menu whenever it comes to those. And right before you do those, usually you get a character that you can kind of like choose to go with you on those missions. And that is when you get to basically go on the mission and you have two characters, because otherwise, if you're just out in the world doing your own thing, you're pretty much a solo character, which there's a little bit of a disconnect there, but you know, it is what it is. Now, beyond the swapping of characters and all of that, as you guys probably seen from trailers and gameplay footage, there's also stealth mechanics. You can hide in tall grass. You can assassinate characters if they don't see you coming. There's a crouching mechanic so that you reduce the amount of noise that you're making. And there's also aerial assassinations. Like you can straight up go in with your glider and then jump off the glider and stab somebody from the air, which is pretty satisfying. There's also assassinations that you can do with your grappling hook. So you can be on top of a roof and someone's right below it. You throw your grappling hook, grab them, pull them up, break their neck, that type of stuff. I like that. I think that's kind of cool. There's quite a variety of those that you can go and do. But you know, that's kind of like the overall description of what you can expect from the combat system. But like I said, if you are someone who is expecting the depth of like Nioh 2, in the very beginning of this game, you're not going to get that. There's potential to get there later on, but from what I've experienced so far, I don't expect this to get quite as complex as a Nioh 2. And the system of this is more like parry hits and do critical hits back, as well as, you know, make sure to choose your combat style based on the advantage of the enemy and make sure to use that specific combat style in order to punish them and be able to get them in panic mode so that you can use your martial abilities and all of that stuff, right? So now let's talk about the open world, and once again, the keyword here is it just feels a little bit dated, right? So there's lots of activities for you to do, but I didn't really find anything that I haven't seen before in other open world games, and I'm not saying the game needs to absolutely break the mold. I'm just saying that it is important for people to be aware of what they're getting into. So you have things like visit this shrine, kill this fugitive, which like I mentioned before, fugitives are also a mechanic in terms of you unlocking new combat styles as well as weapon experience and all of that stuff. But beyond that, there's also clear this camp, take a picture, and so on and so forth. And one of the things when it comes to the open world is I feel that the visuals really do a bit of a disservice when it comes to this, because whenever it comes to an open world game, you want to make sure that you feel very immersed. You want to feel the pull of the world itself kind of like bringing you in. And in the early moments of this game, I haven't really felt that. Like, I've had fun going through and doing all of these activities that are out in the world, killing fugitives, which killing fugitives is actually the thing that I like the most because it keeps unlocking different combat styles for different weapons, keeps giving me new things to do in combat and whatnot. But beyond that, a lot of the stuff that you're doing out in the open world is not particularly engaging. Like, there's some things about, oh, find this cat and pet a cat. It's almost like finding the feathers in an Assassin's Creed game. It's not necessarily the most engaging thing. And it does have that aspect of it, which is the more things you do out in the open world, the more things unlock for you to keep doing. So it does seem like there's a significant amount of quantity of activities for you to go and do. If that is one of the things that you are into, naturally this is with a combat system that is more akin to Nioh, with the caveats of what I've mentioned in the previous sections of this video, right? Now, when it comes to Traversal, I actually think that for Traversal, they've done a pretty good job. They unlock a glider for you very early on in the game, which allows you to basically jump from great heights, and you can glide, and you can go to locations that you want. There's also the grappling hook, and they actually utilize the glider together with the grappling hook. Like, there will be these kites that will be spread out through the world that you can kind of like hook onto, and that will recover all of your ki so that you can keep gliding for a longer period of time. And those are really fun. There's a lot of fun just like gliding around, figuring out what you want to go do. And you can seamlessly transition from gliding into horse riding. Like, you just press the horse whistle button, the horse spawns right below you and you jump in on the horse. So you can basically be, let's say, riding a horse to the top of a tall mountain, jump off the horse, start gliding, and then as you are about to land, call the horse again, a horse spawns in below you and you keep going. And there's, obviously, this is one of the things that I always emphasize when it comes to open world games, that it is an aspect that more developers need to pay attention to. And it is nice to see that at least this aspect of it is very well done, because navigating the world doesn't feel like a chore. Even though the world feels like it's significantly big and there's a lot of things for you to do, it's nice that navigating it doesn't feel like a chore. And the navigation is actually a very good aspect of it. You can also mantle, so it's fairly easy for you to climb up buildings and whatnot. So this is also important for when you are doing missions and you want to see if you can like get stealth kills from rooftops and whatnot. You can usually look around and find like a location where you can pop your grappling hook, go up, or even find some boxes that you can kind of like mantle onto, and from there you can go to a rooftop and you can go to different things. So there's a certain sense of freedom when it comes to the traversal that I personally really appreciate in a video game like this. Then we also have a character bond system, so there's going to be a lot of characters that you meet as you play through the game, and as you meet these characters, you start bonds with them, and you can give them gifts and whatnot, which I'm assuming will unlock additional quest lines from them, which will then unlock additional rewards, and, you know, the whole thing that you've had with social aspects in games like this. And in a lot of ways, some of the aspects of this actually remind me a little bit of Yakuza, because there are a lot of things in the open world for you to do, like quantity. There's tons of stuff. And there is a decent amount of variety, but like I said, this is just from the beginning portions of the game, so there's still a lot that I haven't really experienced when it comes to that. Now, they also point out early in the game that some of your dialogue choices apparently are going to have consequences later, but at this point, I haven't really seen how that stuff is going to work. In terms of loot and equipment, this works very much like we've seen from Neo. So you have that Diablo-type loot system where you have a rarity system, and from there you can get random stats, you can get set bonuses, which also give you additional benefits and all of that stuff. All of those things that you're kind of familiar with from Neo or even just Diablo are going to be present in this game in terms of loot. Now, one of the questions that I've also got was definitely about difficulty. And I can't really talk too much about difficulty because I just started the game on the hardest difficulty and I haven't really looked back. It's been decently challenging, but there have been points in the game where I was like, damn, this feels way harder than what I expected. But then again, I don't feel like I'm a good indicator for that type of stuff because I also tend to struggle very early on in Neo and stuff like that. So it just feels like par of the course. But you know, I've been playing on the hardest difficulty. Feels all right. There's a couple of difficulty spikes here and there. And I believe that on the day one patch, they're addressing some of those things. So, you know, I haven't really tested any of the other difficulties, but there's 2 other difficulties below the hardest one. So if you're someone that likes a game to be more chill, there's probably going to be something there for you that you can go and mess around in those difficulties. But yeah, overall, I've actually been having fun with the game. Like, I think it's enjoyable. I've been enjoying the combat. It's all fine and dandy. The big problem that I have is fundamental. Like, look, I got this game for free, right? So that's one of the things that we need to take into account. And even though I've been having fun, the moment that I jumped into the game, the first thing that I was like, whoa, this looks pretty dated to be releasing in 2024 at this particular price point, especially when we've already had games like Ghost of Tsushima come out, right? That's one of the problems that I have with it. I would expect the level of visual detail and just the overall feel and vibe of the game to feel a little bit better, but that's like my biggest criticism. I think that the game feels very dated for the price point that it's at. I think that this will be a lot easier to recommend when the price gets a little bit lower, or maybe when we're in a season that is not quite as busy, because we just came off of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and this game releases on the exact same day as Dragon's Dogma 2. And yeah, it's going to be very hard, I feel, to just straight up give this game a glowing recommendation with how dated a lot of its systems feel, and also due to the fact that what a lot of people are coming for in a game like this is going to be that mechanical complexity of the combat of something like Neo, and this game doesn't really deliver on it from the get-go. And like I said, I don't think it will even on the higher levels. I think that Neo is always going to be more mechanically complex and allow you to do much more crazier stuff than what we're doing here. But again, I could be wrong. I'm going to keep playing it, and I'm going to be able to give you guys a more informed opinion a little bit closer to release. So hopefully look forward to that. If this video was helpful for you, make sure to sound off in the comment section down below. And if you didn't like my opinion on the game, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Let me know in the comment section down below as well. But this is just the way that it is. This is how I feel right now about Rise of the Ronin. But thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe, peace out.